episode number 251 of the Wholesome Fertility Podcast. I am super excited to welcome today's guest. She is somebody I've been following on Instagram, and I've been really wowed by some of the posts and how she perceives food and how she translates almost the spirit of food through color and art. And literally, I've never ever seen anybody translate the essence of what food is in such an artful way. So I'm super excited to have her on. She's a very unique individual, beautiful way of teaching people about nutrition. One of the ways I found out about her was actually she put a post on when to take certain supplements and how to connect with the rhythm of nature, something that I'm very passionate about. And she is able to really so eloquently translate that in a way that people can really absorb and relate to. So my guest today, without further ado, is Dr. Deanna Minich, who is a certified functional medicine practitioner. She's a nutrition scientist, international lecturer, educator, and author with over 20 years of experience in academia and in the food and dietary supplement industry. Currently serving as Chief Science Officer at Symphony Natural Health. She has been active as a functional medicine clinician in clinical trials and in her own practice, Food and Spirit. She is the author of 6 consumer books on wellness topics, 4 chapters, and over 50 scientific publications. Her academic background is in nutrition science, including a Master of Science degree in Human Nutrition and Dietetics from the University of Illinois at Chicago, and a doctorate in Medical Sciences from the University of Groningen in the Netherlands. She has served on the Nutrition Advisory Board for the Institute of Functional Medicine and on the Board of Directors for the American Nutrition Association. Currently, she teaches for the Institute of Functional Medicine, University of Western States, Institute for Integrative Nutrition, and Institute for Brain Potential. Through her talks, workshops, groups, and in-person retreats, she helps people to practically and artfully transform their lives through nutrition and lifestyle. I cannot wait to interview her today. I'm very excited for you to find out more about Deanna. Welcome to the Wholesome Fertility Podcast. I'm Michelle, a fertility acupuncturist here to provide you with resources on how to create a wholesome approach to your fertility journey. Welcome to the podcast, Dr. Deanna.
Hi, good to be here with you, Michelle.
So excited to have you on. We just had a whole long pre-talk for the listeners. I just love just the fact that she's an artist as well. We're both artists and kind of the art and healing. And I love how you just put things into images. Like really, I feel like you are able to captivate the essence of food, but on a spiritual level. And I remember reading one of your books about the chakras and food. So before we continue, I would love for you to share your story, just really your background, how you got interested in the work that you do, and how you eventually combined all the different parts of yourself into your work.
Wow, that's a beautiful question. I wished that more people asked me that on podcasts because I feel like that's like the crux of it, right? Like, how do we
Yeah.
come into our full expression of ourselves?
Mm-hmm.
Well, I grew up with a very strict, I would say, family upbringing mindset around health and even around faith. And so during my teen years, that really caused me to kind of push the edge a little bit in terms of exploring. I did form an eating disorder during that time because I was often told by my parents that I couldn't have certain things. So I always tried to push against that. So I think within me, I just have this sense of being a disruptor, being a little bit of a rebel, and having that as one of my archetypes. And perhaps for good reason, because that part of me has led me to explore other things. So I grew up Catholic. I grew up in a very strict home. But then when I went to college, I started taking classes like world religions, philosophy of language. I took an art history course. I began to really dive deep into other topics that I didn't really have a sense of until I kind of got into my own sense of curiosity.
Hmm.
So as I went through my college years, I was really always interested in the body. Like that was always there from a very early age. And I would say it's probably also because I was just inquisitive. I was always very reflective, introspective, and I also started to have some of my own health issues surface when I was a teenager. So
Hmm.
I always thought, I want to go into medicine. I want to go into healing in some way. And originally, I thought I wanted to be a medical doctor. So I was on that pre-med path. But then as I started to work for medical doctors, I realized, no, that's not exactly what I want to do. So then I started dabbling in other things. And when I was 19, I took my first yoga class. And that was really an eye opener because I was feeling like it's almost like when you know that something is just true and you don't
Yeah.
have to substantiate it, find evidence for it. It's just like in your being, you just know something is true. And that yoga experience became really like this sense of like, there's something true here that I have to explore. So, in parallel with my science, I was also exploring more of the ancient traditional aspects of healing because I wanted to heal myself and I got curious after that yoga class. So I got in, much like you, I got into Ayurveda. I
Hmm.
got into yoga. I got into chakras. I got into more of the esoteric aspects of healing, more of the energy medicine kinds of healing. I started going to healers. So even at a very young age, I think I was 20 when I went for my first acupuncture treatment.
Hmm.
And the acupuncturist, I could still remember her. She was in Chicago and she said, "Wow, I don't get many people window shopping for acupuncture."
Hmm.
And, I just told her I wanted to explore it. And I had reproductive issues at that time. So I said, well, maybe we work on that. But for me, it was more about the modality. I was just curious. So then I went into graduate school. I continued to study science, but all the while I was also studying a bunch of other things. I would be reading books on whether it was Carolyn Mace, Barbara Brennan, so many different people that really straddle science and spirit and
Hmm.
perhaps are a little bit stronger, I would say, on the spirit side and less on the science, but yet could see that there's also like a holistic view to this.
Hmm.
So I didn't come into doing much with color and painting, much like you. And by the way, I love your painting behind you, as we talked
Oh,
about.
thank you.
I didn't start doing that until I was in my late 20s. And art for me kind of came in the form of desperation. So I
Hmm.
was going through a low period of my life. I was very depressed. I was finishing off one of my degrees. I was just feeling very isolated, and I started painting one weekend. I painted a massive painting. Like it was just like this amoeba looking structure. And it was red, yellow, and black with a black outline. And I just put it up on my wall. And it was almost like I needed to be fed through this art. Like it
Mm.
wasn't just
Love
doing
that.
it, it was like I had to see it. It was
Yes.
like that color and those colors on that piece of paper. It's like they were feeding me like a nutrient, but not a nutrient for my body. It was like a nutrient for my soul. So I started to paint. Every time I would feel stressed out, I decided I need to like get that out. So I would do it through painting. So I would say my journey and where I'm at now is, if I look back now, I'm fusing together science, art, spirituality, because I do see that science is a great method. Science is really great for thinking through something. It presents the opportunity to think in terms of mechanisms. It's a newer science. Spirituality to me is the higher science of it's always been there, it's always been around. We're tapping into spirituality, different practices of mindfulness, consciousness, sense of purpose, meaning, looking at, cellular biology and then matching that to patterns of thinking and awareness. So I think that to me, I kind of see it as the great big whole at this time. That's kind of where I'm at. And art is still very much a part of that. It's creativity. And I know we're going to talk about fertility. So I
Hmm.
do think that that's where that enters into that conversation because I did have a lot of reproductive issues. And I think that my creativity was blocked.
Oh, wow. I love that you're saying this. The second chakra, it's all about that second chakra. Because what is
Uh-huh.
creativity, right? Fertility is a physical creativity. It's just your body's way of physically creating, and it's like giving birth. And it's almost like when you were painting, you conceived, and it was like so you gave birth to an art, and that art came back and reflected to you. And I feel like sometimes when you have certain shapes, they almost like sacred geometry,
Yeah.
they have an energy that needs to be looked at. And when you're looking at it, it almost downloads like a software or like upgrades your energy just by looking at it. And of course, the eyes are the windows of the soul. And it's that whole connection. And I think that like everything matters. Every single part of our senses matter. Every aspect matters. And I love that you talked about science and spirituality, because I find that people either take an either or approach, but they're all part of a whole. And science is an amazing tool, but it shouldn't be the only tool, and it shouldn't be the only method that we experience life and also translate information.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, it is a tool, and we can be liberated by science and we can be limited by science.
Oh, I
It just
love
depends
that.
on how we use it, right?
Yeah.
Because if we're only using scientific studies in order to decide whether or not we do something, we might be limiting ourselves to the potential of something like a nutrient, an active, a food, a modality. If we say, oh, energy medicine doesn't have value because we don't have 200 scientific studies that are placebo controlled and randomized, it's like, well, why would we wait for certain things?
Yep.
So, but on the other hand, when there are so many things to evaluate, sometimes science can be very helpful because it can apply a hypothesis and a reasoning to get us to make a decision that's well informed. But I do
Hmm.
think that much like, it's like information and intuition, it's blending those two things together. And I think it's like yin and yang. It's like bringing together all of the elements. And to me, creativity, because I hope we wax on this a bit because
I
you're an
love it.
artist and I
Yeah.
like to paint. And I think that creativity is the element of water. And so many issues with water, even on the physical level of hydration, water, bloated feelings, swelling in the body, just looking at the beautiful tide of the menstrual cycle and how we are moved by the moon through that. So water to me, and I don't know if for your listeners, to really tap into your dreams too. I studied with a shamanic teacher and we did a lot of dream work. And I was really, there's something so rich about the yin time of the nighttime and the dream time and the subconscious and what percolates on up. And for many years, I was having dreams about water. I was afraid of the water. I would have to go in the water. There would be a tidal wave. There would
I
be a
just had a dream
tsunami.
about water just last night.
There you go. Wow, that primes us perfectly for this conversation. Well, I just always feel like I look at my dreams elementally in an archetypal way. So when I dream about water, I feel like that's that is my subconscious beckoning me to call upon my own creative expression, that perhaps there's something I need to flow, work with, create. And so I take more of that metaphorical interpretation to my dream state. Fire is another great transformative element.
Mhm.
I don't see that in the same way that I see water. I mean, they definitely play off of each other. To me, fire feels like the day and water feels like the night, right? It
Mhm.
feels like one is the yang, one is the yin.
Oh yeah.
And I think, and when we have an imbalance in those, when we're too fiery, when we get burnt out,
Hmm.
it's like we need to replenish, we need to moisturize, we need to hydrate, we need to go into the darkness and sleep more, we need to rest. And I think that for women, especially those that are looking to become more fertile or to conceive and to have children, I think that the body is looking for that sense of that incubator of creativity to prepare for physical creativity. So all of those forms of creation are so relevant for each other. That's just my personal
100%.
take on it.
I feel the same way. I really feel that there's such a strong connection. And as a matter of fact, mean, to get really spiritual, I feel like I work with the energy of Kuan Yin. I've always felt connected with her. Always, from the second I heard about her, it was just somebody mentioned something, or it was a card or something. I was like, ooh, it was kind of like that, like recognition something. But I felt that my art has never been me. I felt like
Mm.
it's always been channeled through me. Whenever I pre planned or overtook or tried to like force or control the artistic process for myself, it never worked out. It would get so frustrated to the point where I'd want to throw out the canvas. That's how, and it can be like that sometimes with the artistic, because it's so primal.
Yeah.
And it's kind of like really this, you're really connected to or open to the inner critic when you're going through that. You're vulnerable.
Yeah.
So it can be very, it can be a lot of ups and downs with it. So I remember having those moments until I realized, no, I need to get out of the way. And once I got out of the way, that's when it flowed. And that really is symbolic for like everything. I think it's even like that for your health and your body, which is why when we're sick, we get out of the way, we sleep. When we sleep and we get out of the way, the body does its thing. We don't need to make it happen.
Yeah.
It just
Yeah.
does. And so I always felt that. So I felt this connection with the creativity. And then I think to myself, okay, so I'm doing healing or natural medicine, which is, it seems like a different thing, but I don't see it as that. I see Guan Yin also moving me when I'm working with women for their fertility. So it's kind of like this creative energy. And as a matter of fact, she's the goddess of creativity and the goddess of fertility and the goddess of compassion. It's kind of like all in one. And then there's that heart uterus connection in Chinese medicine. And it really,
Yes.
that opening up is what allows the creativity through.
Absolute. Wow, you just said a lot there. And I love the connection into a goddess. I mean, having some type of goddess archetype to relate to for one's, and I think you can have many of them. Like there are even goddess decks of cards, and
Right.
which are the ones that you're feeling like this sense of calling to.
Hmm.
For me, I love Bridget, who is an Irish goddess, and
Oh,
so
that's
she's
cool.
more like she's very fiery. Like certain times I'm thinking of her, and then other times I'm thinking of Artemis, more of like the nature-based type of goddess, right? So goddesses as a whole, like looking at archetypes, I think are really important for women because we carry those goddess archetypes within us. So it's almost like, in a more metaphorical way. So Jean Shinoda Bolen has done really beautiful work on goddesses in every woman.
Hmm.
So many people have really looked at that. I'm very resonant with the chakra system because I feel that ever since that yoga class and really getting into this, it became like my operating system. So
Mm.
when I think of the root chakra, I'm thinking of something really earthy and grounded and, like a Demeter, like somebody of the earth, somebody who likes agriculture. When I think of the sacral chakra, I think of, yeah, somebody more flowing and watery. When I'm thinking of the solar plexus, somebody more fiery, the heart, definitely Kuan Yin comes to my mind. The throat chakra, I think of somebody maybe even like Joan of Arc, really calling forth and like looking for their own voice and their authentic expression. And then, of course, like the third eye, Sophia, or Athena, like having the owl of wisdom on her shoulder. And even the pineal gland, if we think of the crown chakra and thinking of light, Mother Mary, Magdalene, kind of looking at some of these types of goddesses connected to Christ consciousness and light. So I know that all of this sounds very esoteric, but I feel that bringing in some of this symbolism, the art, the archetypes, together with what we see as our physical reality, sometimes can be the pathway to moving into spaces that allow us to heal. And just like you said so beautifully, remove ourselves from the situation so that the healing could happen.
Hmm.
Sometimes we get in our own way. I was just talking with a medical doctor friend of mine yesterday, and he was saying something about how, what is it? The quote about the superior doctor occupies the patient while the healing takes place. It's kind of like sometimes we we need to concern the mind and keep the mind busy while the body heals.
Mm. Yeah.
And So it's, because what is in our way? Usually illness in some way is connected into some block. It's about stagnation. It's about, you're within traditional Chinese medicine, so it's about blocked qi. It's about blocked energy, a blocked meridian.
Hmm.
And what does our gallbladder say more metaphorically? What does our liver say to us more metaphorically? I'm actually married to an acupuncturist.
Oh, you
So we
are.
have these,
That's cool.
yeah. So, I love, and he's taught me so much about TCM, just personifying the organ systems has helped me. Like the liver is the general, the spleen as the peacemaker, the kidneys as what are they, the philosopher, right? Like there were all these
Mhm.
kind of the five elements threaded through our body systems. And I think some of us need to get more creative rather than so literal. I think that some people, especially if they're into functional medicine, they start thinking in all of these labs and pathways, and everything becomes biochemistry. And, if you have one thing, it's almost like that becomes magnified, like
Hmm.
a hyper focus on certain things, whether it's mold or and maybe that's where we need to go with certain things for a certain period of time, but I think then also blossoming into the wholeness. So going into the macro and the micro, I think again, the
Yes.
science and the spirit can be helpful for healing.
Absolutely. And when you were talking about symbolism, I mean, we live symbolism all the time. If you look at how we even create, if you look at like how machines work, they are similar to, the circuitry is very similar to the chi in the body. So
Yeah.
we create, and even if you look at highways and smaller roads, and, that could be compared to like our blood vessels and the different sizes and the arteries that move really fast. And,
Hmm.
so we actually create subconsciously what we are.
Hmm. Yeah, I love that. Absolutely. Our inner manifestation is seen on the outside, which is why we have to have a conversation about the planet and people. Because
Yes.
so is the planet,
Hmm.
so we are. It's a reflection of that internal milieu. So when we
Yes.
think about fertility and growth and new life, it's kind of like, how do we see those things on the planet? And why do so many women struggle with infertility at this time? What
Hmm.
is happening? Where is that sense of balance on the planet?
Hmm.
And, we are seeing that a number of things are off
Oh, yeah.
environmentally,
Big time.
right? And I think that a lot of those toxic exposures, like one of the things that I teach about a lot is toxic load. So things like parabens, phthalates, even artificial toxic light at night. I mean, all of these
Hmm.
things can impair our body's ability to be in its natural rhythm and to harmonize with our sense of growth and new life. So there's a block there.
Interesting. I saw something. It was a post somebody put. I don't know if it was yours, but I think it was somebody's post talking about mitochondrial DNA being impacted by not being outside enough, like not having
Yeah.
exposure to oxygen and just the natural elements. I'll tell you, there are times where I feel a deep yearning to just be outside. I can't be in the air conditioning. Like my body just wants to be outside. Maybe through meditation, I think, or becoming more conscious of it. I think when you do get back to yourself and your natural elements, you will naturally be drawn to what is good for you.
I agree. And we just have to make the time to honor those specific requests or that specific intuitive hit as we experience them. So it's really good that you honor that for yourself and you do go outside. And that's why I think, on if we look at social media, there's so much about, well, how do you start your day? Like you need to have a routine. And I think that a routine overall is good because you have a framework, you have a skeleton. But a routine should not rule us either. I think we
Mm-hmm.
also need a sense of ritual. We need a sense of, okay, I need to sleep another hour today. It's okay.
Mm-hmm.
Like
Yeah.
I don't need so much exercise today. I can do something a little bit differently. So I think that those two things have to be well connected in where we have a framework, but with the opportunity to pivot based on our
Yes.
sense of intuition, not to let internal destructive kind of behaviors hijack our routine. So
Mm-hmm.
like there's a difference between intuition and where we might be tapping into something that would be not serving of ourself. As long as it's serving of the self, I see it as something that gives life, gives energy rather than taking it away.
Totally. I mean, I think to myself, like, it's like exercise. Exercise is great for you, but over exercise is not great for you.
Yeah.
So it's the same thing with routine. It could very easily become stagnation where you're
Yeah.
so in a structure, like so rigid that it can impact you as well. And I just think to myself, really, I guess the solution is always in the present moment, right? Just really honoring the present moment, being in a receptive state, listening to what your body is telling you right now.
Yes, absolutely. And balancing that active stage with a rest stage, the sympathetic and the parasympathetic. And the menstrual cycle is a beautiful way to actually give women that imprint of resting and activity. So I'm no longer cycling. I am now in my seventh month of no periods. So I'm definitely on my way to being in that period of menopause. But when I was cycling, what I tried to do was to mirror my activities of the month
Mm-hmm.
with my hormones. So
Mm-hmm.
I would actually use my follicular phase, so days 1 through 14. So when estrogen tends to be high, and I'm kind of in that go-getting kind of place of being very young, outward directed, and goal oriented. So I would try to map my activities to my cycle. And then when I was in my luteal phase, like days 15 through 28, I realized that I couldn't muster up that same energy to do the things on my list. Like I
Mm-hmm.
was in a different heads like I'm a hormone girl. Like I ever since I went through puberty, it was like out of all of my body systems, it was my reproductive tract that was very strongly like my biggest messenger. And
Mm-hmm.
sometimes, we look at body parts of us and we say, "Oh, I can't stand my skin," or "I don't like my, whatever it is, my eyes, my hair, whatever." But there is that organ, even if we don't like it, and we have this dynamic, tense relationship with it. I kind of feel like it's like the biggest messenger for us.
Oh,
It's
yeah.
got like
It's your
the
guru.
biggest lesson. So for me, it was my ovaries and my uterus. There's no doubt about
Wow.
it. And so, like, when I started to key into the wisdom of my reproductive tract and said, okay, you know what? Estrogen and progesterone are running my show. Like,
Mm-hmm.
whether or not I like it, it's just a fact. And I'm very in tune with those hormonal rhythms. Like, if there was a full moon, I would feel differently. Like, I was really connected into that. So rather than resist it, I went with it. And, I didn't do that all of my life. I did that more in my 40s, I would say. It's like I really started to map my life to my hormonal rhythms.
Mm-hmm.
And then I also learned, and many of your listeners probably are aware of this, that nutrients also vary throughout the menstrual cycle, meaning that if you take a blood sample on day 19 or day 5, you could find very different levels of nutrients. And of course, that could be changed through the diet, but we need certain nutrients for ovulation. We need to, just even looking at iron levels, looking at zinc levels, magnesium, these kinds of things change. And
Hmm.
so as a result, our physiological, biochemical aspects may change because we will have fluxing tides of certain
That's
nutrients.
so interesting. What nutrients have you seen shift?
Well, the biggest one for most women would be iron. So having a depletion of iron after bleeding. And so, starting from day one, seeing that shift in iron level. So that's pretty well documented. Zinc is also another one, some of the other minerals. So minerals are really important for so many different aspects, right? Essential minerals help to balance things like heavy metals in the body.
Mm.
And essential minerals like magnesium, I mean, goodness, they're used for hundreds, if not thousands, of reactions in the body.
Yeah,
So if we're low, and most people are low in magnesium, if I think of
true.
women with PCOS,
Mm-hmm.
polycystic ovarian syndrome, typically there's an imbalance there with metabolism and with insulin. So they tend to be more insulin resistant. They
Mm-hmm.
can be. So there can be potentially some issues with magnesium, which is needed for some of the activity related to insulin and just metabolism overall. So I think that, again, when we wake up to the rhythms that run us earlier in our lives rather than later, if possible, it's almost like we get this additional knowledge. And when we let our lives be run by those rhythms, it's like then we can almost feel like we're being more optimized rather than trying to push a rock up a hill and then only to have it fall back on us because maybe we're doing something at the wrong time of the month. Now, not everybody has the luxury to do that.
Right.
Not everybody can say like, oh, well, I can't stop my routine on day 15. But there could be certain ways that you change like the structure of your day. Like maybe you get more sleep or you allow yourself a little bit more rest time during that luteal phase. You allow yourself more creative activities during the luteal phase. My shamanic teacher would say that when women were bleeding, they would be the visionaries for the group if we were doing sweat lodge. So when we would go in and do an active sweat, if we were doing it at the time that, let's just say, I was going through, my menstrual bleeding, I would not be allowed within the sweat lodge because I would be seen by that community as somebody that is more connected in to more of an intuitive state and therefore could vision and help the group.
That's
So I
so
always thought that
interesting.
that isn't that interesting? Like different traditions around menstruation. And I love to think about, and she also taught us about giving our blood back to the earth. So collecting menstrual blood and putting it back into soil in order to nourish and to help with the minerals and all of the expensive nutrition that the body is giving through the blood.
That's so
So I
interesting. Yeah, it's just
yeah.
interesting because now modern world is kind of like shut down from some of the things that were so just natural.
Yes. Yeah, that's so true. And I feel like we have to bring it back. We need to talk about menstruation. We need to talk about how do women know when they're fertile and how do we, I think that there needs to be a whole conversation around sexual health too, because what ends up happening as women move into their perimenopausal time, one of the symptoms on the whole list of things is changes in libido, changes in sexual function, changes in vaginal dryness. And so then all of a sudden, like women start talking, but yet, women aren't talking as much about these things earlier in life, or even talking
Right.
about like their bodies in ways that really honor their bodies and help to empower their decisions. So I think that that's really important because I grew up during a time, so I'm 52, and I grew up in the 1970s, 1980s, and you just didn't talk openly about your body in certain, especially women, girls.
Right.
It was kind of like below the surface. There was a lot of shame. And so now I have a niece who's 9. So I'm all over this because I'm like, yes, I want to go back now and like talk with her. And I already bought her the book. I don't know if you remember this book. It's now a movie. It's Are You There, God? It's Me, Margaret
Yes, I
by Ju
remember this book. Yeah.
by
I loved
Judy
it.
Bloom.
Yeah.
Yes. I mean, I just recently they just made it into a movie,
That
a
was my
modern
time too.
movie. Love that. And I just bought it for my niece. So my sister's like, okay, it's not ready for her to read, but I'm like, when the time is ready, that's the book, just to kind of dive in. And, it's a wonderful book about a girl's coming of age, going through getting her period, getting her first bra, just being able to talk about these kinds of topics where they've been so submerged down into the depths. And I feel like they're bubbling up, which
Yeah,
I
for
think is good.
sure. There's definitely so much power in communicating experiences and having those words and relating it to somebody else and knowing that that's somebody else is experiencing what you're experiencing, especially when your world changes, when you're shifting.
Yeah.
And it's like shifting from childhood into puberty into adolescence and then also shifting from being in your menstrual years to non-menstrual years later on. All of those are different tides and almost like the phases of the moon shifting, and you're wondering like what does this mean and how does it feel. You don't, it's a complete transformation.
It is. And I love what you said about the different phases because we truly go through many different phases throughout our lives. I mean, I think every decade is like a new phase.
Hmm.
I even see them as chakras, right? So, like the 0 to 10, I see as the root chakra. Like that's when we're just deciding who we are. That's our identity.
Hmm.
Family is key.
Safety.
Safety, immune system, red, alert, stress response. Those are oftentimes programmed from a very young age.
Hmm.
Then we have 11 to 20, which is the sacral chakra time. That is like the time of coming out in your reproductive way. Hormones
Hmm.
start to appear and start their dance. And that's when, just even looking at one's sexuality. So, like, that's really the sacral time. And then the 20s to me are like, I mean, and again, this is just kind of a framework. It's not for everybody in the same way, but I see it as a solar plexus time. This is the fiery time of life. This is where you decide, okay, what is the work that I want to do in the world? What am I doing to earn a living? This is where some people they start to engage in the work life. They start to create their professional career. The 30s might be more of we're moving up to the heart chakra. It's more about now we have a better sense of emotional wisdom. We may want to start a family. We may start to want to engage in more of that nurturing and nourishment, right? And then the 40s, I think we now start to move up to the throat chakra. It's like the 40s, I remember my 40s because it was kind of like I started to let go of the people pleasing. I
Hmm.
started to let
Yes.
go of watching what I was saying all the time and making sure I was, appropriate with everybody. So I feel like the 40s is when like that thyroid, the throat really start to emerge. The 50s, I feel like is a time of, often it's referred to as the Phoenix Rising, where we burn a lot of what we have been and we become something brand new for the next half of our lives.
Hmm.
And this to me coincides with the third eye chakra, which is all about intuition, wisdom. The pituitary gland, which the third eye is connected to, is often seen as the master gland.
Hmm.
So I kind of feel like this is the time of wisdom. And then the sixth and beyond decades, we look at, now we start to move into the spiritual. We're
Hmm.
less physical. The body is slowly withering away. We're moving now into less of thinking of our physical self and more of like, okay, what's my meaning? What's my legacy? What's my connection to the whole? What do I believe about the afterlife? What do I believe about a sense of spirit, source, God? I think a lot of those topics tend to come up. So again, that doesn't mean that you won't have
But it does
parallel
make sense,
tracks.
actually.
I've just noticed it just in general for just seeing people and patterns of where
Hmm.
they're at in their lives and what seems to come out.
I think once you start to recognize those patterns, you see them everywhere. And it's almost like the Fibonacci sequence. And there's certain patterns and fractals that tend to repeat themselves in everything in life. Once you
Yeah.
start to see them, it's fascinating, but you see it everywhere.
Yeah, you see it everywhere. And that makes me think of what you just said about the patterns, makes me think of a book by Maureen Murdoch called The
Mm-hmm.
Heroine's Journey.
Uh-huh.
And she talks about, how there's kind of the hero's journey for men. It's kind of like, you move through life and you get the Holy Grail. With the heroine's journey, it's more of a circle. And I would even say that life is like a spiral, that
Mm-hmm.
a woman's journey, and this can be for a man too, really, but I feel like, there are certain repeating themes that come up over and over again, but we're in a different place perhaps the next time that that theme surfaces.
Right.
And I think for all of us, like we're each learning certain lessons and how to grow through that specific lesson. So as we move through each decade, we might see that lesson in a different way. In our 30s, we might see it in a solar plexus fiery kind of way, like, what can I do to make this particular thing change? But in our 60s, we might take a different symbolic spiritual approach to that same very issue. So depending on where we're at, how much we've grown, and kind of looking at the span of our lives, just really looking at it differently,
Yeah, for
but
sure. I
yet
mean,
holistically.
yeah, and also just how we as individuals reflect what is happening outside of us. I think that for me, there was a point in my life where I finally realized, and this is when I quote unquote took responsibility. It was like realizing my responsibility in my life. Whereas there was a time where I thought I was just a participant. This was happening to me. This has nothing to do with me. It's just kind of like victimized to my circumstances. And I'm speaking for myself, like my own personal reflections. And then finally realizing, wait a second, what role do I have? And then even realizing that when things are difficult, rather than trying to fix it, which is the knee jerk reaction, I just want to fix what's outside of me so that I can feel better, to actually sit with it in meditation, sit with the frustration and the difficulty and the resistance. And interestingly enough, I've found that when I do that, things start to resolve effortlessly.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a nice balance of owning and surrendering, I think. I just saw somebody's meme on social media the other day that was talking about how you're the CEO of your life. What do you want from your life? And I think again, we get different points at which we get to evaluate that. And just kind of looking at, okay, I'm here. I know that in my 30s when I started to paint, I was having a lot of emotional issues. I didn't kind of what you were saying, like I didn't feel as in control of my life. I felt like my emotions were overtaking me. I felt that I had a lot of, again, reproductive issues. So I had endometriosis. I also had a blocked fallopian tube on my left side. I often think of the left as more of the healer yin side, and I think of
Yep.
the right as more as the yang, right?
Yep.
So the doing side, but my healer side, I was getting all of these like left side of body kind of complaints. And I was thinking with my science mind, like, why is it happening on the left?
Were you also
So
left-handed? Just out of curiosity.
no,
Okay. Oh, are you? I mean,
no, no, I
yeah.
wasn't, and I'm not. So I'm right-handed. So anyway, I was kind of reflecting on like what is happening for me there. So like with art, like we were talking about before, it allows the subconscious to be made manifest into the conscious reality. And as I was painting, not having like the verbal cues for what was happening within me emotionally and mentally, and even through my body, it was almost like I was reflecting out through painting and through these different things that I would paint what was actually happening inside. I would paint a lot of orange, a lot of pink, a lot of gold. Like pink and orange were colors that I never resonated with. And but yet every time I went to go and paint, I would want to paint those colors. So that was kind of interesting again, because as a nutrient, as a soul nutrient, I was needing that kind of energy. And I tell this story a lot, but my husband, at the time he was not my husband, but as I was dating and I was dating somebody for a long time and eventually we got married, but and he's the guy I'm married to now, who is the traditional Chinese medicine practitioner. But he saw a common thread to all of my paintings, and he would say, Deanna, you're painting your ovaries and your uterus and you're putting them all over the house. And I didn't see that. I didn't see that I had very like vagina-like
I
paintings.
had the same
I
thing. My roommate, because I had also reproductive condition. I think I had undiagnosed PCOS. Not to interrupt you, just really quickly. My friend, I
Yeah,
remember my
yeah.
roommate at the time, because I was living in California. She goes, "Your paintings are like vaginas everywhere."
We're like
And
sisters.
I didn't even think about it. I know. It's great.
Right. And I hadn't thought about it either. It was so interesting that he tapped into it and that your roommate had tapped into it. And the moment that Mark said that, I was then keying in and I said, okay, he's onto something. I'm actually going to consciously now paint, knowing this and let my body speak. So what I did is I created this whole series of the uterus, and I did conception, fertilization, which was like the dance of like the sperm. I did menstruation. I did menopause. I kind of like deliberately then painted like the phases of the uterus, like throughout one's life. And I actually exhibited these paintings at a
That's so
gallery, a
cool.
very small neighborhood gallery. And it was interesting, Michelle, because I think that also having people witness your art is really important because
Yes.
it allows them to see something in themselves that we all collectively share. Like when I look at your
Oh, I
painting
love that.
behind you, It's like that's healing to me. Like it may
Uh-huh.
be healing to you when you did it, but when I view that, there are certain aspects of that painting that just like they ground me. You know,
Right,
it's
this is
earthy and it's yet spiritual. Like it's profound. So I think that art for art's sake is wonderful. It's great to just express and get out whatever you feel, even if it's just color, even if it's just blobs of paint, even if it's just like, I don't know, just different colors coming together and it's no particular shape. It doesn't have to be like some kind of image, right? It could just be energy. It just needs
right.
to get out.
Yes.
And then I do think, because I did have a resolution of many of my reproductive issues, like, I had done so many things, Mayan abdominal massage, acupuncture, chiropractic, herbs, nutrition, and I just wasn't moving the needle on my conditions. Art and allowing myself to be creative in a very logical, scientific way that I was within my own platform and career had opened up something for me, I think. So, through art, through creativity, and also I want to mention this to your listeners as well, because I know many of them are looking to become, whether fertile, conceive, have babies. I actually chose not to have children very early on in life. I was the oldest in the family. I was the babysitter. I was like a mom when I was like 10. Like I was a neighborhood, I was always around kids. I always loved children. And I always felt like I had that resonance and it felt very familiar. Like I know what it's like to be a mom. Like I kind of had that, and I don't want to say that being a mom or having that feeling when you're 10 is anything like actually having children, but I felt like I didn't have that same sense, draw, or need.
Hmm.
And what I needed to do then was, since I wasn't going to physically create, and I also had challenges in that realm, like my uterus was, more in the shape of like not a pear, but it was kind of heart shaped. So I had
Hmm.
some anatomical things that probably would not have been beneficial for me to have children. So there's that. But I needed to create in other ways
Hmm.
because it's just part of our being to create. So being that I didn't have children, I needed to have something else, right? So then
Yes.
I made the
Yes.
art. I wrote books. I taught classes. It's like creativity is part of who we are. And when we block that, when we negate it or stuff it down and say, I don't have time to be creative, it's like everything we do can be creative. So
I
it's part of us.
absolutely, like totally, totally, totally. I mean, I agree with you on so many levels. I remember I was a big fan of Oprah growing up. She's really helped me on so many levels. And I remember her deciding and making that choice, like I'm not going to have kids and I'm okay with it. That is not my path. But I always say she gave birth to so many other things. She just used that energy in a different
Yeah.
way. And that's the beauty, is that I really believe we are born creators, every one of us. Some of us, if we don't create consciously, we will create by default. That's just the way it
Yeah.
is. That's
Yeah.
how I see it. And it's just bringing intentionality. And like you said when you were talking about your paintings, that's what I felt like. You realized what it was. Your husband reflected that to you, and then you said, okay, let me put intentionality into my
Yeah.
paintings and infuse
Right.
that.
Yeah, and it took on a different feeling after I had woken up to seeing it like he was seeing it.
Yes.
But yeah, and I think it's also important for us all as women to support each other in whatever decision we make. Because I know that when I actively chose not to have children, like this is back in my 20s, I I remember I had many people say to me like they couldn't understand why. Like it was almost like I had to justify my decision that I was choosing to go a different route. So, and it felt not very supportive. I think
Yeah,
for,
and you shouldn't have to justify what you choose for your own life that has really nothing to do with anybody else.
well, and it's okay to have a conversation and to be curious about it, right? But when it
Yeah.
becomes more accusatory or like, why wouldn't you do that? It's kind of like it's just part of what women do. It was like that would just make me even more mad about the situation.
Yeah.
It was like, no, and then some women would say to me, they're like, I didn't realize it was a choice. And I
That's
said,
an
well,
odd statement.
it's interesting, to think that it's just something automatic that women do is you have children. So I wanted to be super conscious about, if I was going to enter into that space, I wanted to come into it with like the most consciousness, awareness, and attention I could give it. And I realized that that just wasn't my path. Like I felt like I was going on a different path of creativity.
It's important that you're saying that because some people just know, and I feel the same way with people that know that are having difficulty conceiving, but they know that they're going to be a parent. I believe that knowing, regardless
Yeah.
of what it is there for a reason. It's there. There's some calling from that, regardless of what it looks like. It's a calling that you have imprinted in your own journey, on your own path. And all of
Yeah.
that should be honored.
Yeah, as much as we can. And after a while, I started to come up with kind of interesting creative responses when people would ask me why I wasn't having children, right? Like I would have more fun with it, and I wasn't as emotional about people challenging me about it. But yeah, I mean, I respect women who choose to have children. I love kids. I mean, I love to be around kids. And again, I have this niece who actually is adopted.
Hmm.
So, and that's a whole wonderful journey as well to bring in life and to, just have this little girl in our lives, and just to see all of her progress and to just and I love how my sister has really honored the sense of like where she comes from and like being very open with her about being adopted.
Hmm.
Just love that as well, that my sister has been so authentic in that process with her daughter. So, but yeah, what is fertility, symbolically? It is that sense of creativity. And I often revert back to creativity when I'm feeling like I have a health symptom. Like if I have something, I've got pain in my body. Like one of the things that happened to me even through the pandemic was that I started getting more sacroiliac kind of like soreness and pain. I was just sitting too much. I was stagnant. I was literally physically more stagnant.
Hmm.
So then I also, whenever I get a symptom, I'm looking at it through the eyes of the chakra system. I'm looking at it through the eyes of, okay, am I creating? Like, where am I stuck? Where do I not
Hmm.
have enough flow? Where do
Yeah.
I need to like maybe hydrate and move my body better? Do I need more physical activity and moving things? Or do I actually need to mentally, emotionally create? Do I need to maybe write some poetry? Do I need to make some art? And I would say, like now in my 50s, I haven't felt as called to make like the hyper color art that I have in the past. I feel like my creativity is changing.
Hmm.
So, and just really holding the space for that too, because creativity comes in all shapes and sizes and formats. And what I'm really curious about now is more sound. So like
I was thinking about
more,
that right before our call. This is so bizarre. I was actually humming because I'm starting to do that and kind of like singing and
ah.
sounding. And I was like, and I was thinking about how you're into colors. And I was like, oh, I wonder what she thinks of sound. And now you're
That's
bringing
where
it
I
up.
would say I'm at now is I'm really into like the subtle aspects of like healing like through sound. Was just talking with Dr. Catherine Clinton about her work with sound, vibration,
Hmm.
light, really interesting things from a
It's interesting.
scientific and also a spiritual aspect. So, playing music and humming in the beginning of the day and at the end of the day,
Hmm.
music is so therapeutic. In fact, I just came across a study that showed that music helped to increase melatonin levels in people with Alzheimer's disease. Like there was a
Oh,
study, I just
wow.
posted that on my threads. Yeah, I mean, music is so like, I don't think we understand the full capacity of everything that music is doing.
Yes.
And quite honestly, if I reflect back to the times that I would start painting, it would be my husband is into music. So
Hmm.
he would be playing music and I'd start painting. It was almost
Yeah.
like the two, when I go back and look at it now, I kind of see that, wow, those two worked very well together, art and the music.
Right.
But I do think that sound, even if you're not making like a pop song and it's just humming, it's the vibrational aspects. I think that that's kind of where I'm
The vibration.
reflecting
Oh my
these two.
God. So
Yeah.
many things are going through my mind as you're talking. Well, there's, okay, a couple of things. I saw a really incredible YouTube about, have you ever heard of a solfeggio
Yes.
vibration? Yes.
Of
And
course. Yeah,
they go
definitely.
through different chakras, and that is more conscious vibration, whereas a lot of what we listen to now in mainstream, I feel like is not healthy for our psyche. It's using sounds in a way that's not as harmonious. And also, if you
Yeah.
think about the words that we hear over and over and over again, it's almost like these mantras that go into our subconscious mind. I mean, we listen to songs, we can't get them out of our head. That's how strong they are. So
Right.
when you put consciousness into vibration and sound, it's healing, but it can work the opposite as well. And I'm finding
Hmm.
that, and I think it's important because you could see it also with the crystals in water. With different music, there's a different impact. And then the Schumann resonance. Did you see
Yes.
that? That was very
Yeah, yeah.
fascinating.
Definitely. I think we need to be really, it's like food, right? We wouldn't just want any old processed food coming in. We want to be a bit more diligent about the foods that we're taking in, making sure that they're whole foods, organic if we can. So similar to music, we don't want just processed music where it's not adding to our vibration. It could even be taking away, similar to processed foods. So how can we amp up the signal, right? And just like you're speaking to a lot of these different resonances. And you're right, like many times we play back that same sound in our mind and in our awareness, like it just kind of gets it's like it creates kind of a wormhole within our thinking and we hear it regardless. So we might as well have something that's more consciousness promoting.
Oh, totally. I mean, I could talk to you for hours, and I knew that I mean, of course, it even exceeded my expectations. I knew that we would have an amazing conversation because I immediately resonated with you. And I also recognized a lot of a connection with you just from your work. And this has been such a pleasure for me. Like, I'm
Oh.
so grateful to have you on the podcast and have this conversation. And for people who want to find you, how can they work with you? How can they find you?
Yeah, thank you, Michelle. And I want to say the same about you. Like, I'm so glad that we've had this kindling through Kalia, a mutual
Yeah.
friend, and that she kind of introduced us and went from there. So I'm going to check out your art. I want to see more because it's what I see in the back is just phenomenal.
Oh, thank you.
So where can people find me? They can find me on my website, deannaminich.com. I'm not doing client one-on-one sessions anymore. I'm doing much more of like groups, retreats. I have a potential retreat coming up in November. So I like, in my own way of thinking now, I just feel like the group heals the group, and I like to
Oh,
do more
yeah.
of these kind of group kind of sessions. So I just feel like they're very nurturing to me and to everybody else. It's like we all learn from each other.
It's
We're all
true.
each other's teachers in many ways. So that's where everybody can find me. You can find, in fact, I have a bunch of downloads for people. Like if you go to the website and you go under resources, there's a downloads page. So I have a whole bunch of different things there, like a food and mood tracker. I have an Eat the Rainbow kit. I have all kinds of things. People can see what they like and download them.
Awesome. I mean, I still have like so many questions. I might even have you back because I feel like we could just talk about so many things. But again, thank you so much for coming on. This was like one of my favorite episodes, honestly.
Oh, it's been a pleasure. Thank you so much, Michelle. I'd be delighted to come back.
So that concludes today's episode. You can find all of the links mentioned on the episode notes. If you're enjoying these episodes, please take a moment to share and leave a review. Reviews mean everything to podcasters, and I really enjoy hearing from my listeners. You can also find me on my website at www.thewholesomelotus.com or email me at info@thewholesomelotus.com. I love hearing from my listeners. If you're interested and want updates as well as a free ebook on my top 10 fertility boosting habits, you can visit my fertility page on www.thewholesomelotus.com. I thank you so much for listening in and hope that you have a beautiful day.